Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to do something really fascinating. We're taking some incredibly complex medical and operational protocols and completely breaking them down. We're transforming them into a gripping step-by-step playbook for handling literally one of the deadliest pathogens on Earth, an Ebola outbreak. We're going to dive right into exactly how public health professionals chase down a virus, how they physically protect themselves, and ultimately how they save communities.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. First, the spark and the chase. Second, the frontline battle. Third, winning hearts and minds. Fourth, the long shadow. And finally, number 5, the future arsenal. Let's get right into it.
Section 1. The Spark and the Chase. Tracking the zoonotic spillover.
So you might be wondering, how does a nightmare like this even begin? Well, the crucial starting point is understanding exactly how the virus jumps from nature into the human population. In the scientific community, this is known as a zoonotic spillover. You see, the Ebola virus is maintained in natural reservoirs, predominantly fruit bats of the Pteridopodidae family. The spark, so to speak, happens when a human comes into direct contact with an infected animal. That could be through hunting, preparing bushmeat, or honestly, even just encountering bat feces or an infected intermediate host like a non-human primate. Once that jump actually happens, that's when human-to-human propagation begins, spreading through direct contact with bodily fluids.
To contain that human-to-human spread, contact tracers basically have to act like highly specialized disease detectives. And to do that effectively, they rely on 3 really strict tiers to identify exactly who they're dealing with. First, you have a suspected case. That's someone presenting with a sudden high fever and symptoms like a severe headache or unexplained bleeding, or it's someone with a travel history to a known endemic area. Then, you move up to a probable case. This is someone evaluated by a health worker who also has a direct epidemiological link, meaning they attended a burial or had physical contact with another case. And finally, a confirmed case. That's when responders get that definitive, undeniable laboratory proof through an RT-PCR or ELISA test.
Now, once this tracking starts, everything literally hinges on one very specific number: 21. 21 days is the absolute maximum incubation period for the Ebola virus. And this single number dictates the entire active daily surveillance strategy for anyone exposed. If you've been exposed, the clock starts ticking. For those 21 days, designated community health workers will conduct 2 daily home visits to measure your core temperature and audit you for any emerging symptoms.
But they don't just watch everyone the exact same way. Every identified contact is mapped out and stratified into 2 distinct categories. High-risk exposures involve direct physical contact, things like needle sticks or handling a patient without personal protective equipment. Low-risk exposures, on the other hand, might just be sharing a household without any direct physical contact or fluid exposure. And because asymptomatic transmission just doesn't happen with Ebola, tracers are constantly watching for one specific trigger. If a contact's core temperature hits 38 degrees Celsius, boom, they are immediately isolated and transported via dedicated ambulance straight to a treatment unit.
Section 2. The frontline battle. Inside the treatment units.
This disease presents a truly terrifying dichotomy. In the early dry phase, patients present with a systemic fever and just profound heavy fatigue. At this point, the viral load in their blood is relatively low and fluid shedding is minimal. But as the disease advances into the wet phase, it becomes viscerally devastating. We're talking profuse hemorrhaging and staggering volumes of gastrointestinal fluid loss. The viral load peaks at incredibly high levels, meaning environmental contamination and human-to-human transmissibility reach extreme levels. Understanding this timeline totally explains why rapid isolation during that initial dry phase is an absolute matter of life and death.
So, facing those extreme transmission risks of the wet phase, frontline staff have to utilize a meticulous, multi-layered barrier protection protocol. From fluid-resistant coveralls with hoods and double gloving, to N95 respirators, airtight goggles, and waterproof boots, literally nothing is left to chance. Just try to imagine yourself working in this environment for a second. It's a grueling physical crucible where workers can easily lose liters of sweat in a single shift. And the stakes? A single breach in this armor can be absolutely fatal.
Section 3. Winning hearts and minds, community trust, and safe burials.
Okay, so here are the absolute highest stakes of the sociological side of this fight. Deceased patients carry peak viral loads. That makes traditional burial practices, which often involve washing and touching the body, incredibly dangerous. But here's the catch. Enforcing strict, clinical, safe, and dignified burials without empathy completely backfires. If communities feel disrespected, they'll resort to secret night burials, and that just amplifies the outbreak exponentially. Medicine alone isn't enough. You need deep cultural respect.
So how do responders actually partner with the community to turn the tide? Well, they don't just march in and issue orders. Instead, they engage paramount chiefs and elders in town halls, treating them as co-investigators to build real institutional trust. They work closely with imams and clergy to frame outbreak prevention as a moral and protective act during their sermons. And crucially, instead of alienating or criminalizing traditional healers, they actively partner with them. They run focus groups to encourage these healers to promptly refer any fever patients straight to the treatment units.
Now, I want you to imagine battling a deadly virus. While this terrifying rumor starts spreading through the community, treatment units are just places to harvest organs. Fear breeds misinformation, right? And a viral lie like that can literally stop people from seeking care entirely. So how on earth do you fight a viral lie?
The answer is something called a rapid rumor management system. Response teams actually deploy local listening posts and digital monitoring to capture these circulating myths as they happen. Then, they actively dismantle them within exactly 24 hours. And here is the genius part. They don't use outside foreign authorities to correct the record. They use local language broadcasts featuring voices the community already knows and trusts to set the facts straight.
To further demystify the whole process, treatment units implement what's known as an open-door policy. Instead of putting up opaque, terrifying walls that hide what's going on, they use transparent perimeter fencing. This permits designated family members to safely see their isolated loved ones from a distance. It essentially replaces terrifying mystery with transparent, visible care, which is absolutely vital for maintaining community trust.
Section 4. The long shadow of the virus. Survivor care and stigma.
So a critical point we need to talk about is viral persistence. Even when the virus is officially cleared from a patient's blood, it can physically hide in immune-privileged areas. We're talking places like semen, ocular fluid, the central nervous system, and breast milk, and it can hide there for well over a year. In fact, for the Zaire Ebola virus, semen transmission has been documented more than 12 months post-recovery. Because of this lingering threat, dedicated survivor care programs require monthly RT-PCR testing, risk reduction counseling, and free condom distribution until the survivor achieves consecutive negative tests.
But alongside the biological management, there's a massive psychological and social management piece. To combat severe stigma, survivors receive official clearance certificates from health ministries and the WHO, confirming they're completely safe to reintegrate. Communities are aggressively educated that sharing meals and touching recovered survivors carries absolute zero risk. And honestly, even more powerfully, survivors are frequently recruited back into the treatment units as ambassadors and caretakers. Their natural immunity makes them uniquely capable of providing life-saving, hands-on care, effectively transforming them into the ultimate heroes of the response.
Section 5. The Future Arsenal. Vaccines, trials, and infrastructure.
Moving forward, we now have powerful medical countermeasures in our arsenal, like the single-dose Ervobo vaccine. But instead of attempting mass vaccination, which is frankly logistically impossible in many remote, heavily forested areas, responders use a highly targeted ring vaccination strategy. Around every newly confirmed index case, they define a specific ring of about 150 to 200 direct contacts, as well as contacts of contacts. By vaccinating just this specific ring, they build an immediate, targeted wall of immunity right around the virus, stopping it dead in its tracks.
But of course, to actually achieve that ring of immunity, we run into a massive logistical hurdle: -80 degrees Celsius. The vaccine requires an ultra-low cold chain just to remain viable. I mean, imagine trying to maintain that kind of deep, deep freeze in a remote, completely off-grid environment, like the middle of a dense jungle or a rural village without reliable power.
To pull this off, the response requires just absolute feats of engineering. Logistics teams have to utilize portable, ultra-low temperature freezers, highly specialized solar-powered refrigeration units, and insulated pass-through carriers. It is a massive, incredibly coordinated supply chain effort that has to operate flawlessly in some of the most challenging environments on Earth. It really proves that sometimes the hardest part of medicine is literally just getting the medicine to the patient.
And when it comes to deploying experimental therapeutics in the middle of a chaotic crisis, response teams strictly adhere to what's called the Muri ethical framework. This ensures equitable access based on clinical severity, which means pregnant women and children aren't just excluded from potentially life-saving care. It demands culturally adapted, completely uncoerced, informed consent, fully recognizing how vulnerable people are during a crisis. And importantly, it mandates active, real-time oversight by independent ethics boards and data and safety monitoring boards.
You know, the ultimate goal of responding to an Ebola outbreak isn't just to stop that one single event. It's to build long-term systemic resilience.
as we transition these emergency tracing networks into permanent, compensated community health workers, and as we convert temporary isolation wards into permanent regional public health labs equipped with advanced molecular gene expert platforms, we really have to ask ourselves, by institutionalizing this crisis response into our permanent healthcare infrastructure, have we just written the playbook that will stop the next pandemic before it even starts? Thanks so much for exploring this fascinating playbook with me today on This Explainer. See you next time.